And tonight on PM Express, a conversation about the upcoming vetting of Akufo Addo's nominees and the fallout. You may be aware that Parliament has set a date for the vetting, and you may also be aware that issues of handing over notes have come up. My guest tonight will be telling us more about that, but that's the conversation we're going to be having because the nominees are already set for the vetting. So vetting of Akufo Addo's nominees, settling the handing over notes controversy, and nominees of President Akufo Addo will be vetted from Wednesday, 10 February. President Akufo Addo has nominated 46 persons for various ministries and regional ministers. The appointments committee has 13 members each from both sides of the House, and this is where many say will be very interesting. There's a question about what happens because there's a chairman who is also a member of the NPP, the 13 members from the NPP side. So this is one question people have been asking, and I will be trying to find some answers to that tonight. And Section 72B of the Presidential Transition Act 845 stipulates that the Administrator General shall make copies of the handing over notes and present same to some state institutions, including Parliament. As it stands now, we don't have an Administrator General. There are questions being raised as to why Parliament doesn't have the handing over notes. But the person to do that is not in yet. How do we resolve this matter? Let's look at the concerns. So Boko Central MP Mahama Ayariga thinks the appointments committee cannot do a thorough job without the handing over notes. Mahama Ayariga moved a motion also somewhere last week. It's also a conversation that has come up because people think that there may be a payback time during the vetting because of this. And so he moved that motion, which if accepted by the House, would have requested government to absorb fees for tertiary students due to COVID-19. And that motion sought also to extend financial support to private tertiary institutions. Look at what happened. NPP MPs raised preliminary objections against the motion, arguing it was incompetent, but the Speaker of Parliament dismissed the objections and ruled that the motion was competently moved. But the NPP MPs argued that a cost will leave government's finances in a precarious situation and also that the motion was discriminatory. So in the end, the NDC MPs also argued that the support was necessary to pull Ghanaians out of hardship that had been occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. But the majority decision, Parliament voted by voice to reject the motion, and it looks like the NPP had their way, and so they won. There are fears this may further aggravate the already tense atmosphere ahead of the vetting of Akufo Addo's nominee. So tonight, we'll be trying to settle that controversy over handing over notes as the vetting of ministerial nominees inch closer. I'll introduce to you my guest shortly after this break. My guest tonight, Mahama Ayariga, he's a member of the Appointments Committee of Parliament and also a member of Parliament for Boko Central. Good to see you, Honorable.
Thank you.
It's been a while, and I was wondering the night when there was all this chaos in Parliament, I didn't see you in action.
Well, I was involved in the arguments that night. The knocking off of ballot boxes and snatching of ballot papers and whatnot. Maybe I wasn't really into those ones, but
you were there.
I was there.
Quite interesting to see you. But I think once you're here, let's delve straight into the appointments committee and the fact that the NDC NPP has both 13 for each side. And the biggest question has been, chairman of the committee will be coming from the NPP side. What happens if a nominee comes in and there's the need for voting? What happens?
Well, if there's going to be a vote, we'll vote. And depending on the outcome of the vote, they will know the next thing to do. I think the concern is a certain assumption that when a nominee is brought to the House, that all NDC members will vote one way and all MPP members will vote another way. That's just an assumption.
But what does it mean? Does it mean that the nominee will be rejected, or you will leave that for plenary to decide?
Oh, no. I mean, the committee really doesn't approve nominees. The committee makes recommendations to the House. And if the recommendation is based on a unanimous decision of members of the committee, that's what we call consensus, then very, rare will you find the House rejecting that nominee once the committee by consensus approves somebody. When there's a disagreement in the committee and then the report goes to plenary, usually that becomes a bit difficult. There will be debates and arguments, and then it will be put to a vote, and then it could be problematic for that nominee. But the final authority for approving or disapproving a nomination is plenary. It's not the committee. Okay. Committee only makes a recommendation.
Okay. So once you don't have that power to approve, it means you don't have the power to reject as well.
The committee cannot reject anybody. The committee can only make a recommendation to the House to reject somebody. But the House can decide to ignore the committee and then go ahead and then approve that person. Okay.
Well, one of the interesting things that have come up is the fact that people like Eslo Owusu, someone like Dominic Nitiwul, and a few others who are also members of the appointments committee, how would they be vetted? And because will they themselves have the chance to vote on their fate?
People have asked that question. There are no specific provisions in our standing orders that bar those people from voting. Okay. I think that the question is similar to the question of if you are a candidate in an election, do you also get to vote? Okay. Because you are a candidate. I think ordinarily, when you are a candidate in an election, you get to vote for yourself if it comes to voting. It's a bit complicated in this case because there are no specific provisions that say that you should not vote. Usually, decisions that have to be taken in which somebody has a personal interest, like in a contract or a business decision, you are required to, declare your interest and etc. And, ethically, you shouldn't be participating in taking those decisions. But when it comes to you being nominated to occupy a position, and then you happen to also be a member of the appointments committee, we've never really had that situation where we've had to put the nomination of that person to a vote. Okay. And the question has arisen whether or not the person can vote or not vote. So I don't know if that will come up or not come up. I mean, that situation where there will be a question of voting and then the person will have to either vote or not vote, whether a similar situation will arise in this instance. But ordinarily, you should be able to participate in the vote once you're a member of the committee, and then you're also a member of Parliament, and the vote is going to be about your nomination. The assumption is that you will also vote.
Does the chairman of the appointment committee has a vote? Does he have a vote?
He doesn't have an original vote, but he has a custom vote.
Yeah, okay, what does that mean?
It means that at the first instance, if we are to vote, the chairman does not participate in the vote, but where there's a tie, then the chairman's custom vote will determine the matter.
It's quite interesting, and this is something that we'll be looking forward to when it starts, the voting or the vetting of the ministers start. But there are concerns that, and you yourself, you've warned that people should not come there without preparing because those days are past. So when you come there and you are not well prepared, you will have the minority to deal with. And people are wondering, what exactly would you be doing that is different from what you've been doing all this while?
Well, I haven't heard people say that come well prepared.
Your chief whip did.
As if in the past, nominees have not been coming well prepared. I think that nominees have always come well prepared.
Okay.
Or at least prepared to the best of their ability.
Okay.
Because we all have different standards of preparation. And intellectually, people are at different levels. So people may not appear prepared by your standard, but to them, they are, well prepared. So I think that nominees have always tried their best in terms of preparation, and we all assess them based on that. Now, people really have so much expectations this time, and I think it is more about the fact that the numbers in the House provide some possibilities of the minority group being able to make an effort to reject a nominee if they so consider. And, it's not just the minority group caucus taking that decision, but it's also possible that people on the majority side may actually, join the minority caucus to vote against nominees, and especially because of what happened in the case of the choice of the speaker, where the nomination came from the ruling party, and then the minority caucus also nominated somebody. And then in the end, the minority caucus nominee won because some people on the majority side actually voted for the minority caucus nominee. So that has given people some indication that it is possible this time, unlike in the past, for a nominee to be rejected by the House. But it's not the first time that nominees have been rejected in the House. I think that in the past, nominees have been withdrawn, because the House as a group has felt that the nominee is either not qualified or there's something very serious about the nomination. And then in those instances, very often, you are just given the opportunity as the appointing authority to withdraw the nominee so that the nominee doesn't have to face the disappointment and the pain of being voted out in the House. So this is what is really driving that pressure, that feeling that people could actually be disqualified. But I frankly don't think there will be anything fundamentally different in terms of the work of the committee. The work of the committee is cut out for it by the Constitution. You are to assess whether or not somebody is fit to be a minister. There are constitutional criteria for determining whether or not somebody is fit to be a minister. And then there are political considerations. So the constitutional criteria is clear. I mean, if you are qualified to be a member of parliament, then you're qualified to be a minister. And many of the nominees are already members of parliament. Unless somebody shows to the committee that somebody was not qualified to be a member of parliament and then went and contested, and then the evidence is brought before the committee, ab initio it appears that the person constitutionally is qualified to be a member of parliament.
We've seen a number of vettings that both sides of the House have conducted with ministerial appointees. The last nominees in the last Akufo-Addo government, I mean the first time of Akufo-Addo's government, we saw people like Otiko Jaba, who you really, I mean, everybody could tell that there was some grudge between, if you like, the some members of the NDC and Otiko Jaba.
Yeah, I mean, often a nominee's past conduct comes into question during vetting. And I think that is what we also look out for. I told you that there are two criteria. One is the constitutional legal criteria of whether or not you are qualified to be a minister. The other is political, which is, do we think that you are a person fit and proper to be a minister of state? And so many considerations could go into that category of the determinants of qualification. And so in that sense, people can bring up issues that they may have with a nominee. But then it largely depends on the comportment of the nominee also. Depends on the character of the nominee during the vetting process. You see, some nominees, I don't want to use the word, but some nominees come to it with an attitude. And if you come to the appointments committee work with an attitude, very often you'll be confronted with a similar attitude.
Okay.
But if you've done things outside that politically are not appropriate, in pursuit of politicking and etc., and you appear before the committee, and you're not going to be a national figure, because once you're a minister for all of us. So if those issues come up, and you are apologetic, you show some appreciation that whatever you said may have hurt a certain class of the population that you are now going to be minister for, very often the committee will just overlook what you did in the past. But when you come to the appointments committee and issues are raised about your past conduct, and you want to justify what the committee members think, or some members of the committee think cannot be justified, then definitely they will come at you with all sort of pressures and make it difficult for you. So I think, like I said, it's also the character of the nominees and how they approach the committee, and that is why sometimes you see that posture. But ultimately, you know, in the past, I think that the nominees also could afford to adopt those postures because they felt that whatever the case, the minority members on the committee could do nothing about their fate because their parties, both NDC and NPP, in the times when we have all had the opportunity to nominate people, in the past, our parties have usually been overwhelmingly more than the minority. And so you can always guarantee yourself that you have a significant number in terms of party members to see you through both the committee and then also the House, assuming that there's going to be a vote. But here, I think people are likely to tread cautiously because the numbers are even, at least in the chamber, the numbers are even. It's even worse if, let's say, the first or second deputy speaker has to preside, assuming back when the right honorable speaker decides not to preside and then the first and second deputy have to preside. It just tells the numbers in favor of the minority caucus. But, I mean, let me just say that it is also wrong to assume that it is the minority caucus that will be going after Akufo Addo's nominees. I think it's a wrong assumption.
Okay, but that's the perception out there.
Yeah, but it's a very wrong assumption.
Okay.
And that perception is not right. I think that as a minority, I want to believe that even though some of my own party members take issue when some members of the caucus say, oh, we're going to do a professional job, we're going to look at issues dispassionately, and then based on the individual qualifications and competence of a member, we will do the needful. I think that people take issue with us when we say so, but that's what we have to say. That, you know, we're not running our private affairs. We're running the public affairs. We're running a country. And when you're running a country, you have to always think about tomorrow. And so, you know, the assumption that NDC members will go after the nominees may not necessarily be the case. the assumption that all NPP members will support the nominees is also not the case. I think it's wrong to assume that all MPP members will support the nominees.
You think some MPP members can vote against the nominees?
Oh, the first principal nominee, the Speaker of Parliament, was voted against by some MPP members.
Okay, so you are very confident about that.
What guarantee is there that, other nominees of the president will not suffer the same fate from his own party members? So I just don't want us to as a country, to move on the basis of some prejudice that NDC people are against and MPP people are for. I think this parliament provides some more interesting dynamics. That it may well be that the NDC people will be for and then MPP people will be against. And so
it will be interesting.
Yeah, so I think that each nominee should just come to the committee, putting up their best, and then, trying as much as possible to win the committee. And I think that, the way that the voters voted and the parliament that they gave us provide an opportunity for parliament to really hold the executive in check at every stage. And I also believe that it humbles all sides. It humbles all sides. So we may see a situation where the ministers and the nominees going forward will be a little more humble than we have seen in the past, because they know that this is the parliament that can bite. And you don't know where the knock will come from. It will come from your own side, it will come from the other side, or it will come from both sides.
Interestingly, you made the point earlier that for somebody like Otiko Jaba, she came in with her own attitude. And of course, having, some events having happened around her with some members of the minority, she should have treaded cautiously. Would same hand be stretched to people like Eslowusu, who we saw having some fractions with some members of the minority during the inauguration of the 8th Parliament? Hawa Kumsin, we saw what happened when we were doing the voting, the registration of the voters register. Dominic Nitiwul, some members of your caucus have accused him of inviting the military men into the chamber and what have you. Would you approach them same way you did to Otiko Jaba?
As I indicated, if I speak here for the committee, I'll be making a false claim. I speak for myself here because I'm not speaking for the committee here. And I can't say how the committee will approach any particular person. I think that for the two people that you have mentioned, the three people that you have mentioned, at the end of the day, it will be a question of evidence, because the committee, we sitting there, it is live on national television.
Definitely.
Everybody's watching us. And it is one sure accountability mechanism, the fact that everybody's watching us. Now, once everybody's watching us, we want to strive to do the right thing and be fair to everybody. And so the key issue is we'll ask all the questions that need to be asked. That we will ask. You'll be given the opportunity to answer those questions.
Including why Esla sat on Akando's laps.
As for why Esla sat on Akando's lap, that one I know.
And why she pushed
Maybe for the fun of it, I may ask, but I know that one already. But I don't think that those interesting, funny episodes in the life of the parliament would be the issues that will really be the stumbling block of whether or not somebody will get past the appointments committee. There may be more fundamental issues about you and your person and your work that will engage the committee's attention, but I don't think that the committee will trivialize the work of approving ministers and then focus on interesting episodes like that, no matter how interesting they may be. So for the three ladies that you have spoken about, I think that I will not prejudge what will happen to them. All I can say is that, these are, two ladies and one gentleman. These are people who are already ministers of state, are already members of parliament. So it will be difficult for one to say constitutionally that they are ineligible to be ministers. The next criteria then is political. Both your work, and then your disposition and how you carry yourself and how members of the committee feel about you and what you say and how you manage their perceptions when you appear before them. And remember that it's not just us watching, it's the whole world watching. It's live on national television and the whole wide world is watching. And as a committee, we will try to do justice to all manner of persons that come before us. And we would have to comply with our constitutional responsibility. And at the end of the day, the three people that you have mentioned, they will have the opportunity to justify why they should be supported by members of the committee. And then, ultimately, it is the wider, plenary that will take a definitive decision. But why do you think that any of those three people will have a problem? Is it the issue of what? Her sitting on Akando's laps? I don't think that will be the basis for disqualifying her.
Well, there are a lot more to that. For Hawa Kumsin, we know what happened, and we heard what the minority said about all of that. So,
I don't think the minority has so far issued any official statement that they will not or we will not approve anybody. The minority has not.
That's not what the minority has said.
The conduct of those people have engaged the attention of the minority, and we have raised them at different fora. But in the context of their nomination by the president and their appearance before the appointments committee, so far we haven't said anything about what we will do to anybody. Definitely. Yeah. So
we've only asked them to come prepared.
I think even if we hadn't told them to come prepared, they will prepare and come. And of course, they have to reflect on their own lives, how they have lived it, their public responsibilities, how they have carried them, and then come, because questions will be asked. No, there's no doubt about questions being asked.
Okay.
I believe that they may also have answers.
To the questions.
To the questions.
And the NDC realistically thinks that you can block any nominee's chance of becoming a minister if in the event you are not satisfied?
It won't just be the NDC. It will be the committee and it will be Parliament. If the
because your warning has been that, gone are those days when you had the majority, so you just come, and then even if we have issues, you will just be passed. Now we have equal numbers, so you can't just, it's not a walkover.
Exactly, and I think that it is good for Ghana that it is not a walkover, that it's not going to be a mere formality. That when you come, you have to prove yourself. You have to justify your nomination by the president. And I think that's good for Ghana.
Okay.
And we will be failing Ghanaians if you come and you are not up to standard and we just pass you. I think that it will be encouraging mediocrity in the running of public affairs. And I don't think that the taxpayers' money, the kind of monies that are used to pay us to run the affairs of the public, it will be fair to the taxpayer that we line up, mediocre people to run public affairs. And so this current structure of the parliament provides an opportunity to screen people properly, and if really they don't meet the standards, to raise the red flag and then say, hey, look, we don't think this person meets the standard. And then, let the entire House decide. But I just want to emphasize, I don't know if you have heard me, but I just want to emphasize that the perception that the NDC caucus is just going to go out there, massacring people out of personal or perceived antagonism towards particular nominees is not right. We will strive to do a professional job, and if in the process we're able to prove that you are not capable of doing the job, I think that we'll vote according to our conscience.
Now, to your concern that a constitutional provision is met, the fact that handing over notes must be given to Parliament to aid your vetting of the nominees. And I remember far back in December, the Information Minister designate, Upon Nkrumah, explained that as far as he's concerned, his colleagues have submitted their handing over notes to the Chief of Staff. And from now up to next week, which is February 10, when you'll be starting the vetting, we still have some time, and which many say, why the rush?
Well, I mean, the rush to request for the
documents, because if it's been handed over to the Chief of Staff, the likelihood that you would get it to peruse it, it's not far-fetched.
The work of a sector ministry over a period of 4 years is quite enormous. And so to report that will usually require significant documentation. And members of Parliament, even without those huge documents, are already busy. So when you add those piles of documents, I've been a minister before, I've written handover notes before, and I recall how, thick my handing over notes were. So I can imagine that those handing notes would be very voluminous. And so to wait till, let's say, vetting of a minister is tomorrow, then you bring me handover notes of 500 pages to, peruse before I go and vet that person, amounts to not really giving me a real opportunity to prepare before vetting that person. So I don't think that it would be a wise thing to wait till the dying minutes for you to bring us huge piles of handover notes that we should read. If that happens, I, for instance, will object and say we should postpone the vetting of that particular nominee and give the members of the committee reasonable time to study the handover notes before we come and then vet that person. I don't know if my proposal will carry the day, but that's what I will propose. And that is why already I have raised the issue that, look, this is a special situation, special in the sense that we have a president who is continuing in office. And he has presented Parliament with a list of nominees, the majority of whom were occupants of the same position that he has nominated them to go back and occupy. And between the last time that we vetted them, and this time, the only difference is the fact that they've occupied these offices, the same offices for 4 years. Unless somebody brings something legal that disqualifies them, let's say in between the person has committed a crime and has a court conviction or something of that sort, or in between the person has done something but the court hasn't convicted but it's been hidden, and then somebody has reported to us as a committee, either petitioned or a journalist has flagged it in the newspaper, and then we see it and then we bring it to your attention and you don't have a satisfactory answer, we may have issues with you. Other than something radical as that, the key issue then is, how did the person perform his task as a minister in the same ministry for the past 4 years?
4 years.
So you mentioned somebody like Nitiwul. He's been the defense minister for the past 4 years and a member of Parliament for the past 4 years. The president has renominated him to go back to the defense ministry. And then there is a handover note that constitutionally or statutorily we are obliged to be given a copy. We don't have a copy. And we've been asked to, vet his nomination. The question I ask myself is really, what is the most important document here when it comes to actually doing a thorough job to satisfy the taxpayers' money. I think that we need these handing over notes because every project, every initiative, every program that he has executed in the past 4 years should be in those handing over notes. And so we can use that effectively to assess him whether we should entrust our defense sector to him to manage. So that is really the basis on which I push for us to have the handing over. Our leader, Honorable Haruna Idrisu, raised this issue not in relation to vetting, but he raised the issue of the fact that by law, the Parliament is supposed to get a copy of the handing over notes by law.
Yep.
So whether or not we're even doing appointments committee work, by law we are supposed to have copies of the handing over notes. And it's supposed to be a comprehensive report of what happened in each sector, agency, region, the office of the president, the office of the vice president, and etc. We haven't had that. But this appointments committee has a special task of vetting or scrutinizing the nomination of people who have occupied the same office for the past 4 years. If those people were nominated to occupy different ministries, it may well be that I will say, well, I mean, it's a different ministry. So I may want to assess him in relation to his previous ministry if I have the documents. But fundamentally, I'm more interested in him and what he did in his ministry because he's going back there. So I believe that it's only proper that we should be given.
But the Section 7(2)(b) of the Transition Act itself stipulates clearly, and if I may read, it says, it stipulates that the Administrator General shall make copies of the handing over notes and present same to the some institutions, institutions, including Parliament. But the question is that we don't even have an Administrator General as at now. What role has that played in the delay?
Well, I mean, I recall, like you said, that the Information Minister said the handover notes were ready. So constructively, even if there's no Administrator General, you have a transition team. And so the transition team must take steps to make sure that the institutions that by law are required to have copies of the handover notes do get them. And Parliament is one such, institution. Unless people want us to take the president on for failing to implement the provisions of the Transition Act, the Presidential Transition Act. Because the president's job is to enforce and implement the laws of the country. And it is one such law and a very crucial, stage of our country's and measures that one must take to make sure that everything is done properly. And his role as the executive responsible for implementing the provisions. Don't forget that a lot of the work of the transition team actually precedes 7th of January, okay? And before 7th of January, the same person was president. So it was his responsibility to ensure that this was done. Then after 7th of January, the same person became president. And it was his responsibility again to ensure that the laws of the country are enforced. So he has to explain to us why there's no Administrator General. But then, for me, that is immaterial. If government has said, no, we don't even have handover notes, that's a different matter. But like you said, the Information Minister had already come out to say there were handing over notes available. So if they're available, give them to us.
When I return from the break, we'll be turning our attention to Mr. Ayariga's motion he laid in Parliament for a waiver for university students. You remember that motion was shut down by the NPP caucus in Parliament. The question remains, why didn't the NDC request for a head count? They could have won, you know, if they had the numbers. I'll be putting that to Mr. Ayariga and also find out if the NPP caucus behavior would trigger a payback during the vetting. Stay with me. Welcome back to PM Express. We've been discussing the work of the vetting committee and also trying to understand why handing over notes are so important for this exercise. I've been speaking with Mahama Ayariga, who is Member of Parliament for Boko Central and also a member of the Appointments Committee. Honourable, last week we saw that your motion for university students not to be allowed to pay fees was shut down. And the question many ask, okay, so if you so wanted to pass this motion, you wanted it approved, why didn't you call for a head count after the speaker said, you know, you had lost by the voice vote?
Well, I mean, that day presented interesting scenarios. And if you go to the Hansard of Parliament for the day or the videotape and then you review it, you will see that there were some discussions about whether or not even the vote should be taken that day. And that was really because the minority caucus, based on directions given to deal with the issue of COVID, has divided itself into 3 sets. And at any one time, you only have a third of the minority in Parliament. I think that the majority is also obliged to do the same, but I don't think they complied. So, unusually, their numbers were far, far more than the numbers of the minority caucus. And so the first issue was not to have the vote taken that day, so that a date will be scheduled for the vote to be taken. And somehow that option was not taken. And so once that option was not taken, a voice vote would have just gone in favor of the NPP. And the question of whether or not we should have asked for a division, we could have, but then you could see, usually you see from your numbers in the chamber that even if you call for a division, you will not make any headway because the majority side appear to have taken a collective stand on the matter, and the minority side were not there in our numbers. I also believe that many people were not really sure when a decision will be made in relation to the motion, because we had adjourned several times, several times. And so I believe most of our colleagues would not have known whether on that day we'll be voting on the motion. And also because initially the NPP had given an indication that they will support the motion if we amended the motion in a certain way. And so if you paid attention, you would have noticed the speaker kept referring to it as a consensual motion. Now, a consensual motion is a motion that both sides agree on. So the belief was that the majority side, majority group agreed with the motion as amended. They had issues with the original motion as I proposed, but then they insisted that we should change suspension of fees to government absolving the fees. I didn't have any serious objection to that because for me, the objective of the motion is to draw attention to the plight of parents and students so that as a parliament, we can urge the president to do something about it. Now, if there's something that you think the president can do is to direct that the fee should be absorbed by the state. That's fine.
Okay.
In my opinion, it would have required several measures, both absorbing some fees and then suspending some fees.
But the reason that was given by the NPP, wasn't it genuine? Because they are close to the purse, the public purse, and they know how pressured it is. And they say if they adopt this, it will put a lot of pressure on the public purse.
Well, I mean, once again, you know, it is a mindset that we have that every problem is a money problem. Some problems are not necessarily money problems. They are efficiency problems or inefficiency problems. And so when a problem is an efficiency problem and you throw money at it, unless you are using money to buy efficiency, but if you just throw money at it, it doesn't solve the problem.
So what?
So for instance,
motion was?
So the issue wasn't just about money. The issue is about when you have a pandemic, and the pandemic is affecting your economy in such a way that a public good like education, people cannot ordinarily afford, and yet it's a constitutional right, and they must enjoy it. Is it possible for you to calibrate the system in such a way that you're able to meet the capacities of people to be able to afford it?
Yep.
For me, that is the more fundamental question before you talk about whether or not it is money that you must give to universities. And that was why my original motion said suspend fees. And now what I was looking at is a situation where we take the fee schedule and then we look at the items and see which items in the schedule we can take out. That's where the suspend comes in.
Okay.
So if you take the fee schedule, you find out that there could be 7, 8 items. Matriculation is there, sports dues is there, entertainment is there, SRC association dues is there, T-shirt for SRC, hostel for SRC, ICT support 300. For most of the universities, it's 300. Development levy for the year. That, I mean, these are the items that constitute the, and then you have user fees for facilities of the university.
Okay.
These are the items that constitute the fees. So my argument initially is that the first step to working to ensure that parents and students are able to access tertiary education within the pandemic period is to see which items you can suspend. So you can suspend matriculation. Say, look, already we don't want to encourage gathering, and matriculations essentially are gatherings. So the bill for that, please suspend it for this year. Entertainments, suspended this year. Sports, suspended this year. Even development, you can say, look, let's suspend whatever project. If we're constructing a new theater, a new sports stadium, a new lecture room, we can say, look, because times are hard, so can we suspend this project for just a year? And then when we're able to normalize the situation, then we can reinstate these fees. Now, so efficiency would have dictated that you sit down and look at your cost components and see which ones you can suspend. And thereby, in the process, you bring some relief. It may end up being, let's say, 30, 40%, or even 50% of the cost to parents. That's of the fees. Because beyond the fees, parents are actually bearing other costs. For instance, hostel costs in private hostels, that one the state can hardly do anything about. Transportation costs to school every day, the state can do nothing about that. Your feeding, books, textbooks, your laptops, internet bundles and etc. All that are borne by the students and their parents. The state can't go to that extent. But then the one that you pay to the state institution, the university, the state can look at someone and say, okay, we're waiving this one for you just for this year. And I said the president because by our constitution, under our constitution, it is only the president that can bring a legislative instrument to parliament, asking that those items in the bill should be suspended. Now, the second way is for the state to say, okay, there are some aspects, because the other argument was, when you suspend, how will the universities get money to run? So I wasn't oblivious of that, that if you suspend, the universities will have a problem. So you now sit down with the universities and say, okay, this is a pandemic situation. Our economy is badly hit. There are all sorts of issues. We're in debt. We're trying to get out of this. You can't insist on your pound of flesh because everybody else is making sacrifices. So the same way, universities have to make sacrifices. But what do you need essentially to run? Okay? They need water. They can't be there without the water running. They need electricity. They can't be there without electricity. They need some basic administrative expenses to be borne. They can't shut the laboratories down. Laboratories have to function. And so they will need those monies. So my second proposal was then, okay, for those ones that the universities essentially will need to run, once you engage the universities, you will get to know. I mean, it's a basic administrative issue. And that you could get from the GET fund. So you can have an arrangement with the university and say, okay, we'll give you this from the GET fund. I heard somebody saying that, oh, the universities don't trust government. If government said they were going to give them the money, the government would not have given them the money. You can insist on the money coming up front, in which case we could have gone to a bank to say, look, we need to give universities 100 million. And we're expecting proceeds into the GET fund of 1.3 billion. So can you advance this 100 million? Let's give it to them to start. And then, you know, when we receive the proceeds into the GET fund, we will pay the bank. So there was no way that if we committed ourselves to helping the universities run, when the universities were going to make sacrifices to help, you know, pupils, the students and then parents access education, then we will leave them in the cooler by not giving them what they need essentially.
Let me bring in this quick one before I let it go because we're running out of time. They're already warnings to members of the appointment committee that from the way things are going, we don't want to see the Ejako style where people are making allegations that of bribery and what have you. Have you heard same? Parliament.
Yeah.
Do you think that is something that can happen?
In people's desperation, they may make an effort to reach out, and some of the efforts may be improper. It's up to you as a member of parliament to decide how you react to an improper approach. But I can say with certainty that nobody has improperly approached me. I think that the nominees are entitled to approach you as a member of the panel or of the committee to try and make a case why you should support their nomination. I think this is normal. The same way they can approach the leadership of a caucus to urge them to try and then convince their caucus to support
with money?
Not with money. They can just approaching to make a case. It's called lobbying. You get the point.
Yeah.
They can do that, not with money, not with any inducements. If they attempt to do so with money, that was clearly improper, and I'm sure that the alarm will be raised. But all those rumors out there that members of the committee have been compromised and etc. are just rumors. I think people are just inciting the public against the committee for no valid cause.
This is something we'll be looking out for next week when the vetting committee or the appointments committee sits to vet. Thank you so much. Mama Yarga has been my guest. He's a member of the appointments committee of parliament and MP for Boko Central. Many thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of our programs.